Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Highway to Hoover, a production of SEC Extra over at D1Baseball.com. I'm your host, Joe Healy, joined today by Director of College Scouting for D1 Baseball and Prep Baseball, David Seifert. He and I are going to take a trip through the Collegiate National Team players, SEC Collegiate National Team players that went off to Japan. And, well, we won't talk about how it went in Japan for the CNT. It was not necessarily a successful trip from a results standpoint, but we did get a good look at some of the best players in the next couple of draft classes coming up in college baseball. So we'll talk about the SEC guys specifically there. We'll get to it in just a minute, but first, I have to remind you this episode of Highway to Hoover and every episode of Highway to Hoover is brought to you by Academy Sports and Outdoors. The sun's out and the fun is on at Academy Sports and Outdoors. Score a cool pool, savor summer flavor with the grill, prep for fishing weekends, or mount up with a new mountain bike. However you have fun, you can't lose with our top brands. Gear up online at academy.com or at your local store. Seif, good to have you back. We should preface this this conversation by saying that Seif and I kind of split the intel with the Collegiate National Team a little bit this summer because Seif got caught in one of those awful travel circus loops that sometimes happen. So my condolences for that, Seif, even though it's been a couple of weeks now. I'm sure not a fun few days for you trying to get to the CNT, but between you and I feel like we saw everybody we needed to see.
No, anytime you're stuck near LaGuardia Airport for almost 2 days because they can't fly to Raleigh-Durham is a little discouraging. I was reminded again earlier this week trying to fly home from the Cape and being delayed I don't know how many hours at Providence Airport. So don't travel with me. If you want to travel quickly and safely, I say not safely, but if you want to travel quickly, don't travel with me. Yeah,
fair enough. Yeah, there's something cursed about Aaron Fitt and I joke about the trip back from the Cape being somewhat cursed because, last year he had a flight. I forget what the original problem was, but he had a flight canceled that forced him to have a flight where he flew from the Cape to Martha's Vineyard and then from Martha's Vineyard to, I believe, New York City, and then New York City back to the Triangle. And then I had a flight canceled this year coming back from the Cape, had to spend the night in DC. Anyway, yeah, just that trip is cursed, apparently, trying to get back from the Cape for D1 baseball staffers. But
yeah. Fitty flying through Martha's Vineyard sounds pretty much par for the course there.
No doubt.
Right?
No, absolutely no doubt.
He probably was on a golf course while he was there, I'm sure, on his long layover. Yeah, so.
That's right. That's it. Yeah, he went and found a place to play 18. He fit right in. The folks at the 19th hole there probably were happy to see him. They, knew all about him. All right, Seif, let's jump into the players here. We're going to go position by position. And again, just for the listeners, we're talking just SEC prospects today. Obviously, there's more than that. Seif is in the process now of writing up the prospect reports, so you can check those out at D1 Baseball. I wrote a little bit about the CNT, as I was watching them when I was there. So my stories are still up. So a lot of information actually already out there on these guys, but hope to supplement that today. Let's start with the right-handers, Seif. So those three names of the guys who made the final cut of the roster: Gabe Gackle of Arkansas, Ryan McPherson of Mississippi State, and Liam Peterson of Florida. Just take your pick there, Seif. Of those guys, who stands out to you, and what do you want to share?
Well, I'll go with my favorite, if that's okay.
Yeah, please.
And he's my favorite because I've seen him the most, and I'm just a huge fan of Gabe Gackle. Obviously, after his freshman year, he was just utterly dominant out of their bullpen, and then he went into the rotation the first half of the year, struggled. His control just wasn't what it was coming out of the pen. He went back in the pen. He was the normal Gabe Gackle, right? So his velo was a little bit down with the CNT, but I think it's just that time of year, right? He's more 93, 96 as opposed to 95, 98, right? So everything else was down a tick or two, but the slider was still getting whiffs. He's still riding the heater up in the zone for whiffs, and it was the same Gabe Gackle. He could be Gage Wood 2.0, right? Kind of a guy maybe the scouts are thinking more second rounder at this point, but I think he's a mid-first rounder at the end of the day. He's also kind of drawing some comparisons right now to Spencer Strider. So, the 5'11", 6-foot righty with the ride on his fastball and the breaker to go work down in the zone. So for me, Gackle is far and away my favorite righty on the CNT.
From an evaluator standpoint, what do you do with the season that Gackle had where it wasn't a disaster in the rotation by any means,
no,
but he was clearly more comfortable in the reliever role. How do you evaluate that? Like, how do you look at that? And do you have confidence as an evaluator that eventually, because he's throwing starters innings out of the bullpen, he's just not starting games. So how much confidence should there be that whoever drafts him might be able to send him out as a starter and have success?
Well, luckily we have or a little bit less than a year to go till that draft, till it matters. So I would assume Arkansas, I mean, they're going to have a loaded rotation to start with. We'll talk about probably Cole Gibbler later, but Gabe Gackle, I mean, Gabe Gackle could potentially go back in that rotation and front that rotation. So I just think we have a year to let it play out. I'm sure he'll go back to Fayetteville and he'll start this fall, extend him a little bit this fall. And then hopefully, be in the rotation come in the spring, just give him another shot. Now, after 2 chances, it doesn't go so well, then I think he gets that pigeonhole or whatever. Okay, high leverage reliever, right? But if he goes back out there and gives another shot and goes fairly well, or if not great, if it goes great, I mean, we're talking about him in the top 5 overall. That's where I think he'd go. But, and then just kind of adjust from there. So basically, bottom line, he still has 75, 90 more innings in him in college to make that decision before I think scouts can really, put him in a spot.
Yeah. And if the floor is high leverage reliever, you're still in a pretty good spot with somebody like him, just given the stuff. So
no doubt.
I really was impressed by Ryan McPherson, Seif, in my look, a guy who had good numbers at state. But I'll admit, even as someone who covers the SEC day to day, like I'd seen him a couple times in the regular season, didn't have a great feel for him, but first pitch out of his hand was 98 miles an hour. And so it's one of those where you kind of sit up a little straighter and you're like, all right, I guess I'm going to lock in here. But another guy who I think he already had a fairly prominent role for Mississippi State, but I have to imagine with Brian O'Connor and that staff taking over, I have to imagine he's someone who's set up to just be in a more prominent role for State moving into 2026. But what was your takeaway from seeing him?
Oh, I mean, he's a 2027 obviously, but I mean, he's 6'3", 200, 205 pounds. It's a projectable frame, body type. And like you mentioned, 98s. And I think there were several 98s, not just the first pitch, but I think he had several of them as he went. But what separates him, he's got an 83 to 85 mile per hour curveball that has, I mean, it's got big depth. I mean, you saw it. He repeats it, right? And then he also has a power changeup, and it has bottom to it. I don't know if it's a splitty grip. It kind of bottoms like a split. I don't know the analytics on it, but he has 3 pitches that are all plus or better that he throws for strikes. He has a quick pace delivery. It is repeatable. I mean, if there's not a bona fide first round follow from the 27 class, I mean, there's some pretty good players in that class already. Like I said, we'll talk about Gibbler here in a little bit. And there's some other arms around the country, Volantis from Texas, Valencia's now going to be at Mississippi State. So I know we're on the USA C&T, but McPherson is definitely, my point being, McPherson is already one of the top 5-10 right-handers, college right-handers for the 2027 draft, in my opinion.
That brings us to Liam Peterson, and a guy that I think we've both seen a ton of, just because his innings total is just incredibly high for someone who still has at least a year left in college baseball. But what have you seen from him most recently? And do you have a feel for how he's different or better or what have you now versus some of the early looks you had with him?
So I obviously Peterson improved for me. I saw him as a freshman, then as a sophomore. So I saw him just year to year, again this summer. So he is improving. The thing that hasn't really improved much is his fastball, which is, it's his primary, right? He's a hard thrower. He throws up to 99. I think he was more like 94, 97 with the C&T, but his fastball is pretty true. It's pretty straight. So he's going to have to either do 2 things: really be able to spot that fastball up right to the edges, for 6-7 command, which he doesn't have yet. He may get there, or he's going to have to really spin to win. So he does have a mid-80 slider that has plus action. I hate to say it's inconsistent, but, it'll flash plus. It's got some swing and miss, but it's just not just a deadly pitch. It's not a big whiff pitch for him yet. So, those are kind of 2 ways for me to the first round. I know a lot of other places have him like one of the top 5 college prospects already for next year. I'm not there on him. I think he's a top 2-round prospect, but I think it's going to be the second round if he can't find a way to have some more action on his fastball, or again, just develop that like plus command so we can spot it up. Or I think he's more of a second rounder just because the fastball shape doesn't allow it to play as well as it should. But regardless, he's one of the top arms in the SEC, and he is a day one draft follow.
Certainly not a problem, if you will, that is foreign to Florida right-handers. Brandon Sproat famously, hard thrower, first couple of years of college, fastball just played down. And so, obviously that's still a trajectory that even if that ends up being the case, there's a lot of folks who would love to have the Brandon Sproat trajectory. So,
no doubt.
Yeah. Let's talk lefties. You've mentioned Cole Gibler a couple of times, Seif, and I know you've been high on him from the jump. So tell me a little bit about him and what you like about what you've seen from him.
Yeah, the first time I saw Gibler, I had not seen him in high school. I saw him last fall when Arkansas hosted Oklahoma State. They're in that. I think they had a 3-game series, maybe mid-October. But just super impressed me there. At that time, I think he was more 6'2", 190, 185, just out of high school basically. And just 3 pitches, repeatable delivery, compact arm action. And now he's beefed up to about 200, 205. Just looks great. I mean, he's found his man strength and his man body. He struck out like 6 guys in 3 2/3 innings against Japan in Japan. And I didn't see, obviously, that action. I was not there for that. But just watching the video and seeing his pitch counts and what have you. But that was about as good as appearances. The pitchers, I think, as a staff, had a 5.50 ERA, and the hitters hit like 2.01. So it wasn't, as you alluded to earlier, it wasn't the most successful trip as a team. But Gibler did have a really good trip overseas and within the trials. I mean, he's got a plus breaker that kind of leads his arsenal. It's just he's got a ridiculous breaking ball. It's more of a kind of slider action. It's got a little curveball. I don't know. It's super good pitch. And this past spring, I think he even had like a 60% whiff rate, which is outstanding. Yeah. That's like 98th percentile, or it's super high. But what further separates him apart is you've seen his arm action. You see his action, right? He just kind of hides that ball behind his hip with that compact arm action. And then when he turns to throw, it's basically coming out of his kind of, right there outside of his shoulder. It's just tough to pick up. So he clearly throws hard enough in the low 90s. He's got the breaking ball out of the same spot as that fastball, and both are hard to pick up out of his hands. So super good combination of everything for Gibler. And I think at the end of the day, he's a first-round prospect at this point. How high? It's up to him to show it, right? His consistency as a starter, consistency with his stuff, but he's a really exciting one for me.
Yeah, you love kind of the starter pack he has, and I don't mean starter, no pun intended. Like just the starter kit he has, where it's. I mean, he's getting whiff on a fastball at 91, and it's like if that even just given his action, like if that ticks up a couple ticks and it starts to become even a bigger weapon, you add that to the fact he's already got feel for spin, like you're really starting, like, yes, this stuff does not light up a radar gun the way other guys do, but you're starting from such a good place from the, he's got the deception and he's got the feel and all that stuff. And as he just gets stronger and more mature, like you'd think that, some of the other stuff will come later. So it's just an exciting, like, raw materials to work with from Gibler.
Yeah, and in the backup for a second, he's a 2027. He's just coming off his freshman year. So he like McPherson, there's plenty of time to develop that extra 2, 3, 4 miles per hour and just to pitch into it, like he's done. So.
And this is Arkansas, so certainly velo gains just kind of come with the territory. Like I am certain they will figure it out.
They know a little bit about pitching there, correct?
They do. All right, starting the position players off, we're going to stick with Arkansas, actually. We're going to talk Ryder Helfrich behind the plate, a guy I saw didn't see him a lot as a freshman because he was kind of in a timeshare situation. But over the last summer, a year ago on the Cape, I came away impressed. Obviously had a really good season for the Razorbacks and, topped it off with a CNT appearance. I'm particularly interested, Seif, in your evaluations from a defensive, soft skills catching standpoint, because you're just a much more trained eye on that kind of stuff than I am. Catcher is a tough position to evaluate for those who haven't worked in that industry. So let's start there. Tell me a little bit about Ryder Helfrich, kind of the athlete and defender, and then of course we'll talk about the bat as well.
Yeah, I mean, athletically, he has everything you need to be a first round pick. Just not a prospect. I mean, it's a plus arm. It's a cannon. He's got good enough hands. He's agile with his feet. He can block. I think his framing, his receiving has improved and will further improve. So, I mean, he's definitely a guy on the upswing. Now, he was the CNT's backup catcher, but so he didn't see as much time over in Japan, especially. I think he just had like 8 or 10 at bats. As who was there? I'm sorry, the starting catcher eludes me right now, but Von Lackey, from Georgia Tech was the starter. But they're both kind of on the same trajectory. I know we're not here to talk about Lackey in Georgia Tech and the ACC, but that's what Helfrich is. He's more athlete than refined catcher right now, but just the improvements he made from his freshman year to sophomore year, not only behind the plate, but in the batter's box. I mean, we're talking a guy who hit below 200 as a freshman, and this was in 30 games, to over 300 as a full-time guy for the Razorbacks. So, he had power. There's a better than plus raw power. He had 15 home runs this past year. So if he just continues on his normal development path, which is another good thing they do there in Fayetteville at Arkansas, they develop guys, turn them into first-rounders, turn them into dudes. Really, the next step for him in the batter's box is just to continue to cut down his strikeout rate. You know me by now, I'm huge on strikeouts, right? You can have all the power you want, but if you're striking out 25% of the time, then that's just a tough sell, especially in the top couple rounds. But Helfrich's on that path. He's doing everything he can do to become a first round and a legit, maybe even middle of the first round type of guy another year from now.
Yeah, I'm interested in that as well, because when I saw him on the Cape last summer, it was a lot of home runs, but they were all between the left field foul pole and like the gap. Like it was just a very narrow spray chart in terms of his power. And I was like, that feels like he could be a guy that could hit 12 or 15 home runs, but he might hit 250, Right. And so the fact that he hit 300, took a bunch of walks, like suggests to me that like, okay, he's figuring it out. Like it's not perfect. And his strikeout total is 53, which is high, but it's not, I mean, you have guys that strike out 85 times these days, with power. So he's starting from a decent place, and I'm with you. I think tools wise, I think he'll get there. But I have to admit, a year ago I was a little bit nervous about that, and he proved me wrong, which is great, because he was a lot of fun to watch.
Yeah, I think at this point that's very fair for you to say. He's a 240 or 250 hitter, which is not a bad hitter these days, right? Like with the average being like 253. So, but he is going to be he's going to hit for below a major league average as a big leaguer, but he's probably going to have average to above average power. But what's going to separate him from being kind of that backup to that frontline starter is how far along his catch, throw, and block, comes along and just leads the staff, which again, he's doing everything he can in his development curve to become that guy.
Let's talk infielders, Seif. And for me, the guy who jumped out immediately at me is Chris Rembert from Auburn.
Oh, for sure.
And not just because the first at-bat I saw at the CNT was him hitting a home run, but also because of that. And look, it's not, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but, he's not necessarily like electric. It's the run times are solid, and defensively he plays a good second base. They tried him in the outfield. That didn't go quite as well, to be honest. But, he's had he produced at Auburn as a freshman. He's obviously got the pop in his bat. There's just a lot to like there, but tell me a little bit about from where you sit, what you see with Rembert.
I think Rembert is the most underrated. Now he is sophomore eligible, draft eligible as sophomore for the 26th draft. And so that's part of it. He only has 1 year, of statistics and games and what have you. But for me, Rembert is probably the most underrated prospect for the 26th draft at this point. And not so much by talking from scouts and then not saying that, just by me watching him, by seeing what he's already done, seeing his tools, his athleticism. He's not highly regarded or highly ranked really anywhere else. And I don't watch every other draft rankings there are, but Rembert for me is just that guy. I mean, he has a chance. He's not the dynamic J.J. Weatherholt type, but he's certainly like a Christian Moore or a Seaver King, that type of player. And those are all top half of the first round guys. So, there's still obviously a lot more bats and a lot more time for Chris Rembert to become that guy. But I think that's where his trajectory is taking. I mean, Not to sit here and read stats to you, but the guy walked more than he struck out. His walk rate was 14. His strikeout rate was only 13.8. I know they're close, but you don't really see too many freshmen doing that. And he hit for power. He had 10 home runs and 24 extra base hits. His ISO was over 200, which is pretty darn good, which is actually really darn good for a freshman in the SEC. So he's one of my, I hate to call him a sleeper favorite because he's not really a sleeper. Obviously on the CNT, you're not a sleeper, but man, he's an exciting guy. He's an exciting player.
Well, he might be considered a sleeper if you compare him to the trajectory of, we'll talk about the next guy, Tyler Bell, where, obviously Tyler Bell turns down big money from the Rays, 66th overall pick last year, decides to go to Kentucky, and then largely lives up to that hype. There was concern about the bat going into college, but he competed just fine. And the defense we knew would play from day one. But so compared to Tyler Bell, who was, one of the most, highly anticipated freshman in the country going into last season versus Rembert, who was a little bit more of a talented guy, but a question mark. I think that's a fair assessment, but tell us a little bit about what you saw from Tyler Bell. I thought there was probably nobody more important to Kentucky's 2025 season than Tyler Bell because he was pretty much immediately their most dynamic player.
Yeah, I mean, he's just that's not like now Rembert has bigger tools, right? So he's got a bigger ceiling. And I just want to back up on Rembert for a second because firsthand saw Rembert hit a ball 440 some feet, right, leading off a game. So I mean, that just tells you. And then later, I remember you were marking like, oh yeah, he walked and also stole a base. So right there, he showed his power, he showed his speed, and he showed his plate discipline, right? And those are like three major. Your ability to hit and control the strike zone, that is like the major factor in how high you go in the draft. And
well, so and there's baseball IQ there too, Seif, because like he stole the base, but I remember it was on the pitcher, not so much on the catcher. Like, so he was timing pitchers. He was thinking it through. This is not, nobody's really Enrique Bradfield in terms of just straight line speed, but it's not that. Like, he's a good runner, but it's not like that. And so he has to do some of that stuff. Like, he has to time pitchers and understand who's catching and what counts to run in. And so he just shows a lot of that kind of, that just know-how and IQ that, again, for a player that young, you don't see a ton of. So sorry to interrupt there, but go ahead.
No. Thank you. That's very good. But Bell, like Rembert, is going to be a sophomore eligible for the 26th draft next year. So kind of fun talking about these two back-to-back. Bell has good tools, not as big as Rembert's, so his ceiling's not as high. But Bell is just like that steady Eddie guy. He's going to give you a little bit of everything. He's going to give you that solid defense. He's got above average arm, if not plus arm strength. He's got power, and I think he's going to grow into even some more power. I mean, last year he had 29 extra base hits, 10 home runs, 17 doubles for Kentucky as a true freshman. He stole some bases. Maybe not the top line speed or even the instincts that Rembert has or Rembert showed you, but they're good. He's got above average instincts. So again, comparing the two, little less tools, but a very solid overall player. Not really any weakness in his entire game, other than maybe cutting down the swing and miss a little bit more. He struck out, over 20% of the time last year, but he was a freshman in the SEC, so we'll give him a mulligan for that. But another exciting, most likely first round pick next summer.
Yeah, and that bet on himself looks like it could very well pay off. That's so hard to do when you're already 66th overall in terms of the draft. To better your position means you better be pretty doggone good, and so far he's been good enough to do that. The last guy, you didn't get a good look at him, but I saw him was Ace Reese from Mississippi State. And, what you like about him is obvious. Like, he looks like a big leaguer right now physically. Like, he just looks like he's the guy you want getting off the bus first, as they would say, just because it's an intimidating presence physically. It's big-time raw power, but it also has the feel to hit. So he hits for power to all fields and has a good idea how to work an at-bat. Like, it's not just a grip and rip approach for Ace Reese, so that's obviously very positive. The good athlete, but the question is going to be defensive. Mississippi State played him at third base all last year, so they were willing to live with him there. But he's also played some outfield, but it is just going to be a question of where he ends up landing defensively. And I know he wants to be an infielder. He wants to be a third baseman, and I tend to appreciate that about a player when they say, obviously you want them to be a team player and be flexible, but someone who's just decided I'm going to be good at this. Now, sometimes they don't get there, right? but the fact that he is kind of digging his heels in and saying, I'm a third baseman, I want to be good at this, to me is something that not everyone is willing to do. So the fact that he seems willing to do that, I think is a positive. Now, new coaching staff at Mississippi State, and not that Chris Lemonis didn't care about infield defense. Surely he did, but it's more that, Brian O'Connor in Virginia, like that's a program that you got to be pretty solid defensively to be able to play for them. At least that's been the history at Virginia. So will Ace Reese be able to do enough defensively to where Mississippi State isn't tempted to move him to first base or try to stash him in left field or DH him or what have you? That's going to be something interesting to watch, because history suggests Brian O'Connor is going to value the defensive piece to where Ace Reese is going to have to be good there, not just adequate, in order to continue to hold that job down. So, Seif, I know you didn't get a great look at him, but he's a guy who's just, the physicality is what stands out most. And that's what a team, almost regardless, I mean, unless he becomes Brooks Robinson at third base, like you're going to be buying the bat. Like that's just what it's going to be, the physicality in the bat.
Right. It's similar and I'm not saying he's Cam Smith, right? Not too many guys make it up to the big leagues in 6 months from their draft date, but, or I guess 9 months. But point being is, Cam Smith had the power. Nobody really knew he was going to be a third baseman. So, Cubs got him, traded in Houston. They moved him to right field, right? So, not saying Ace Reese can be a future right fielder, but Ace Reese can hit, right? And there's places in the top 2 rounds of any drafts for guys that maybe he has a chance to play at third. Well, but he's 6'3", 210 pounds, and he moves well enough to play in right field. Ace Reese does not strike out that much for a power hitter. He had 20 home runs last year. So there will be a place in the top 2 rounds of the draft for Ace Reese, whether or not he can play third base. So, And again, I'm not trying to say he's Cam Smith, but there are some similarities there with what they can do at the plate.
Yeah. Some of the other, we're not going to dive deep into these guys, but there were most of the players in the SEC that arrived at training camp for the CNT made the final cut. There were 4 who didn't: Cam Kojal of Arkansas, Tomas Valencias, who is transferring to Mississippi State from Virginia, Aiden King of Florida, Landon Mack, who's transferring to Tennessee from Rutgers. Just quickly on those, I'm intrigued to see Aiden King moving forward. Obviously, it's tough to make the team as a freshman here, but I know, Seif, you're big on him, so if you want to just kind of do a quick riff on Aiden King, feel free.
I forget, it was in week 6 maybe of this past spring season. He started at Tennessee, and I just couldn't believe he was a freshman. I mean, he was locating his fastball wherever he really wanted it, throwing that slider in there. Just looked polished like a college junior, like he was Mark Singer, right? Ready to go in the draft, go over in the first round of the draft. So King for me is, he's a 27, but he's right up there with the pitchers I mentioned before. Maybe he doesn't have the ceiling of McPherson just because, he just doesn't have that, I hate to say younger looking body or that projectable body. King is kind of what he is, but what he is athletic and tallish and strong, but he's got now stuff. Huge fan of Aiden King for sure.
Yeah, and I didn't see Landon Mack. He pitched it at the trials in a game in the Charlotte area where I didn't get out to. But I will say this, if Tennessee's taking him with the way they kind of have an eye for pitchers and develop pitchers, I'm going to assume he's a dude, because I didn't see him a lot at Rutgers either. I mean, I know I've talked to scouts about him. I know his reputation, but I'm just going to assume that they think they can turn him into a dude, because Tennessee doesn't really take guys out of the portal that it doesn't think it can turn into real dudes.
Right. And Landon Mack was up to 97. I mean, he's 93, 97 with his fastball. He only threw he threw one appearance, he had 2 innings during the trials, just allowed 1 hit and struck out 3. So, I mean, I can't say, I'm not going to sit here and say, well, why didn't he make the club? Because they chose 10 really good pitchers that made the club. But it's not like Mack went there and didn't do well. He was one of a lot of guys that went there and did well, but they had to pick the 10 or 11 that they thought would help the club the most, and he was just kind of odd man out. But he did well for himself for sure.
Tomas Valencias, I saw him. Got to pull my notes back up here on him, but certainly a guy that we saw early at Virginia as a freshman. Wow, this guy could be their next guy. He faded a little bit down the stretch, as typically happens with freshmen, but I saw him with 3 pitches up to 95 with his fastball, changeup and slider, where I think with the changeup you'd like to see a little more separation, but it was a short look, so who knows? I think he went 1, 2, 3. So, but at least in that outing, I was I would have liked to have seen a little more separation there from the fastball. But the raw materials are good for a left-hander that if he can do what he did at Virginia, certainly moving on to Mississippi State, I think he's going to be fine moving forward.
Yeah, and I saw him as a prep, and then I saw him as a freshman, and as a prep, I was like, okay, limited projection, just with the body type, right? Limited projection. And I think the day I saw him, he was like maybe 89, 93, right? So you're thinking, okay, that's still pretty good, right? Because he can spin it, and, he's got good feel, and he's just a good pitcher. But then spring reports, he's like up to 97, maybe even touched to 98. And then during the trials, I think he was up to 95. So all of a sudden, my limit to projection is wrong. And now he's pretty much sitting, 92, 95, 92, 94. That's really, really good. And he was another guy. He only got one appearance, 2 innings, didn't allow any runs. I think he struck out a hitter or 2. So, again, it wasn't like he did the trials and didn't do well enough to make the team. He was just one of the odd men out.
Yeah. And then Kojal, I mean, you talk about just like and I truly don't mean this in a derisive or negative way, but just a really good college player that I think has the tools to be a pro. But what impresses me about him, though, is I don't think there was anybody on the field during the trials that took it more seriously than Cam Kojal. Like he was, he was diving for balls. He was running out ground balls. He was, he did a lot of little things well. He had the dirtiest uniform sometimes coming off the field, but I also think he's just an impressive story of high-profile recruit, gets to Vanderbilt, doesn't seem like it really clicked necessarily, ends up at Arkansas, obviously, and then last year was a huge part of what they do there, but feels more of like really good college player you want to have on a team trying to get to Omaha. But I'm interested in your take on him and just what his pro future looks like.
Yeah, and I think you hit it on the head. I just got back from the Cape, and I saw him in the Cape for a few games out there, and it's exactly what he is. He's kind of an undersized second baseman, average-ish, fringe average defender. Not that he's not going to get better. That's just kind of what I saw. He has a little bit of power, but not a ton of power. So you start grading the tools. I guess my point being, you start grading the tools, and the tools are all fringe-ish, right? But then there's that 70 grade makeup, that 80 makeup grade where he is that guy, diamond balls, dirty uniform, getting after it. So that makes up for maybe not having the greatest tools. But, yeah, good college ball player at the end of the day. Certainly a top 3 or 4 round pick if he just continues to produce. But he's always going to have that size and limited tool working against him as he continues his at Arkansas and then into pro ball.
Yeah, certainly going to be a guy, an organization, whoever drafts him is going to appreciate having in the clubhouse the lower levels of the minor leagues, because he's going to be somebody who's going to play hard all the way through September in a way that it can be hard to do at the lower levels of the minor leagues, frankly, when you get to that time of year. So a value add there, if nothing else. And I don't want to short him. He's obviously a very talented player, and I think it's going to be a big part for Arkansas again moving forward. So,
yeah, I certainly wasn't trying to short him either, but he's just you got to have those carrying tools, and currently he's a very good college player, and you need tools to be a first rounder.
That's right. Tools. That's right. All right, Seif, I think that's an episode. Good catching up with you. Always good to get your feel on some of these players. Got to have you on more often, because the feedback, you and I did a draft episode in May, I guess, on this show, and the feedback I got from that was really, really positive. So perhaps we'll have to have you on a little more often to kind of chop it up about some of these SEC prospects. So thanks again, Seif.
Thanks for having me, Joe. Appreciate it.
All right, folks, that is going to do it for this edition of Highway to Hoover, a production of SEC Extra over at D1Baseball.com. Thank you again to Academy Sports and Outdoors for sponsoring this and every episode of Highway to Hoover. Thank you once again to Director of College Scouting for D1 Baseball and Prep Baseball, David Seifert. And thank you, the listeners, for listening. We'll talk to y'all soon.